All right, we're just going to let everyone take a couple seconds to join in, and then we'll get started. All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Alexandra DeLazio. I'll be a moderator for this session. You are in instructional course 76, a fall prevention and management program for full-time wheelchair and scooter users living with MS. So I'm just going to introduce Laura Rice here to present the session, and I'll let her take it away.
All right, thank you so much. All right, just one second. Just have to move the controls. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Looking good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming, especially at the end of the day. So I'm Laura Rice. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Community Health at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And my background is in physical therapy. So I just want to acknowledge all of my co-authors. There's a lot of people that have worked on this project. I've been studying this concept for about 8 or 9 years now. So I've amassed a great group of people to work with me. Just as far as disclosures, I just wanted to note that the main study that I'll be talking about today is funded by the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, but we have a lot of other sponsors that sponsored various studies that I'll be discussing today. Okay, and then just a special thank you to my co-investigators, Dr. Elizabeth Peterson at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Dr. Debbie Backus at Shepherd Center, and Dr. Jake Sosnoff at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And probably the biggest thank you to the graduate students, Rebecca Yarnot and Liebeck Abu. Without them, this definitely wouldn't have come together. They put a lot of work into this. So what we're going to be doing today is first talking about some background on falls, talking about circumstances associated with falls among full-time wheelchair users. Then we're going to talk about the current research on the topic, and then pretty much simultaneously also be talking about different education strategies that, that we used in the research. And these are hopefully things, if you are a clinician, that you can take back to the clinic with you. And then end by talking about kind of where this study goes next and how we can make it more accessible to other individuals living with disabilities who use a wheelchair or scooter. Okay, so starting off just a little of the background. So there's about 2.8 million wheelchair and scooter users in the United States. And I am primarily focusing on individuals who use a wheelchair full-time. So there's people who use a wheelchair for 40 plus hours per week. So a lot of people living who use a wheelchair and scooter are affected by falls. So really anyone with limited mobility, muscle weakness, or impaired balance. I particularly focus on individuals living with spinal cord injury and multiple sclerosis, but certainly other populations are affected as well. Individuals who have sustained amputations, individuals with cerebral palsy, who have had a stroke, or older adults, just to name a few. So before we get too much further, I'm just going to define what I mean by falls. So when I'm talking about falls, this is inadvertently coming to rest on the ground, floor, or other lower level, excluding intentional change in position to rest on furniture, walls, or other objects. So we're really talking about falls that occur when people are doing kind of their regular activities of daily living. So we are not talking about falls that occur when people are maybe going out of their way to put themselves in danger, such as like doing a party trick. Or we also do not look at falls during sports. This is really important, and certainly something that we should pay attention to, but it's just not part of the studies that we're conducting right now. Because falls occur in very different ways for that. So looking at some of the statistics, so among individuals living with multiple sclerosis, our research lab has found that about 75% of the population we surveyed reported at least one fall in a period of 6 months. And about 50% of those people sustained an injury associated with their fall. In 2019, there was a pretty large systematic literature review done among individuals living with spinal cord injury. And among those who use a wheelchair or scooter, about 70% reported at least one fall in a period of 12 months. And then oldie but a goodie, a really goodie, Dr. Kirby did a study in 1994 is when it was published, and then found among non-institutionalized manual wheelchair users, about 57% reported at least one fall. And again, close to about that 50% level were injured as associated with the fall. So physical impact of falls, pretty obvious things that we think about. So it can range from minor things like bruises to more significant problems like fractures or concussions and head injuries. And the consequences can be pretty significant, even with these minor injuries. If somebody has limited skin integrity or sensation, a bruise actually can turn into something bad pretty quickly. So individuals can be on extended bed rest, or falls can result in death. About 70% of fatal wheel mobility device accidents are caused by falls. But so as I said, I've been studying this topic for a while now, and I used to really focus on the idea of the physical impairments. Maybe that's a pretty typical physical therapist thing to do. But now that I've been in it more, I've talked to more people, I really think the psychological impact is actually where we can have the biggest input. So fear of falling is a really significant thing. So it results in activity limitations, diminished performance of activities of daily living, limited community participation, and reduced quality of life. And it really does kind of have this vicious cycle. So we have a fall, our confidence reduces, we have more fear of falling, we do less activity, we have a physical decline, and then our risk for falling increases, and it just keeps going round and round. And then fairly recently, one of my students did a study of 68 wheelchair users and found that about 61% reported a fear of falling. But really what I think is much worse is about 50% stopped doing activities that they like to do because of a fear of falling. And he also found a relationship between fear of falling. So as fear of falling increased, quality of life decreased, and so did community participation, control over participation on the CPI. Okay, so yet another thing that we need to think about when we're talking about falls is then how to get back up after the fall occurs. Because this can be equally as bad as the fall itself. A researcher coined this term called critical falls. And this means needing assistance to get back up to a desired sitting or standing position after a fall occurred. And this study was among ambulatory individuals. We have to unfortunately borrow a lot from the ambulatory populations, but we can use that data pretty well. And then these critical falls, when person needs help to get back up, can result in delayed initial recovery. So being on the floor 10 minutes or so, or a long lie time. End of the day. And then my lab a couple of years ago looked more specifically at wheelchair and scooter users. And we found that almost 80% of wheelchair users need assistance to recover, compared to about 50% of ambulatory adults. I am so sorry. Sorry, I want to try and see some of your faces while I'm talking, so I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself in my office. And then we also found among manual wheelchair users, people who required assistance to recover had significantly lower reports of community participation compared to those individuals who could recover by themselves. So these critical falls can result in poor quality of life, serious injuries, or even death. And this again comes from the ambulatory literature. Okay, so looking now at some of the circumstances associated with falls. So back in, I think it was probably about 2013 when I started this, I was talking to some colleagues about this. We decided to do a systematic literature review looking at the circumstances associated with falls. And we really didn't find much. We barely had enough to do a systematic literature review, but we did have enough. As far as circumstances, we found that wheelchair characteristics, so things like small casters and so on, were associated with falls. Falls commonly occurred during transfer activities. People often had impaired seating balance that kind of contributed with the fall, and then environmental factors. So I do some seating and mobility. I run a small clinic, and I'm always talking about the wet leaves in the fall and stuff like that. So those kinds of factors did come into play. In the systematic review, we also found that there were a few clinically feasible outcome measures that people could really use in the clinic to look at falls. And then at that time, there was only one intervention study to manage fall risk. And it was among individuals living with lower extremity amputations and inpatient rehab. So we figured, okay, there's a lot to be investigated in this topic. So then we did a deeper dive specifically among individuals living with multiple sclerosis. And we kind of, just wanted to know more about them. So we asked questions about the fall location and found that most falls occur in the person's home. And then we also asked, what were you doing when you fell? And kind of the top ones that came out were transferring, reaching for an object, and then walking. And this was interesting because these were all individuals who were full-time wheelchair users. But individuals often talked about, areas that they couldn't get their chair in, so they had to walk a little bit. So we started to get some baseline information, but that was a survey-based study where people could put in a free response. So we didn't really feel like we knew a lot of detail about what was going on with them. So we did a much deeper dive. We did qualitative interviews with 40 wheelchair users. So 20 power wheelchair users and 20 manual wheelchair users. So we asked them to talk about their most recent fall that they experienced. And so we took a really deep look into that. So as far as time of day, we found that falls were occurring around the clock, more in the day, as you'd expect when people are up and doing things, but also found that a lot of falls were occurring at night when people were getting up maybe to use the bathroom, only half awake, and had a fall. So movement related fall contributors. So kind of the things that you would think of. So either driving or pushing their manual chairs, doing transfers. So that confirms some of our earlier work, reaching for objects, sitting, kind of losing their balance, sitting. And this ambulation kept coming up. And this was among a group of more diverse wheelchair users. So not any specific diagnosis. So again, they were full-time wheelchair users, but this ambulation part just kept coming up. As far as location, a variety of different locations, both inside and outside of the house. Then we also looked at intrinsic and extrinsic factors and found things like poor balance, disability-related impairments, things like spasticity was probably the biggest thing that came into play, and then intoxication as well. And then some extrinsic factors, human interference. So if they had like a care partner assisting them with maybe a transfer and the person not knowing what to do, a fall occurred, a wheelchair malfunction. So maybe poor maintenance, poor driving characteristics or pushing characteristics, not really having those good wheelchair skills. And then again, those environmental factors. So wet leaves, poor curbs, things like that came into play. Okay. So then we were interested in learning a little bit more about population specific characteristics. So we again took a deep dive specifically among individuals living with spinal cord injury and multiple sclerosis, and really found about the same thing. We didn't really find too many differences than that other study we did. In this study, though, we also did some comparisons between individuals living with spinal cord injury and multiple sclerosis. Fairly similar across the board. For the individuals living with multiple sclerosis, more of those falls occurred while walking. I think that's not surprising since more of those participants retain their ability to walk. More individuals living with spinal cord injury had a fall during manual wheelchair propulsion, but those were probably the biggest takeaways from that. Okay, but probably the biggest thing that came out of this and all these different qualitative studies were a much better understanding of the idea that falls are multifaceted. So every story we heard, there were all these different factors coming into play. So when I was transferring from my wheelchair from the couch, I was distracted and I was tired. Also, the setup, the room was bad. So all these different things, these different actions the person does, some intrinsic factors, extrinsic factors, the environment were coming into play. So it really made us think that if we are going to intervene effectively, we really need to be looking at the whole picture. We can't just focus on like transfer training or something like that. We have to really be educating the whole person, which is a great way to practice, but that was critically important, and also getting a lot of healthcare professionals involved as well. Okay, so moving into the intervention studies. So we took all of this information that we were learning and we worked on developing interventions. So early on though, we did just kind of target the low hanging fruit. So we first started focusing on transfer skills, seated postural control, and then a discussion about the fall. So individually kind of targeting the problems that the individual person would have. And this was a fairly basic intervention. It was with a physical therapist. It was just one visit and it was a 45-minute intervention. So the participants came in, they did their baseline testing, we implemented the intervention, and then 12 weeks later, we met up with them again and repeated the baseline testing. And despite kind of this limited intervention, we actually found a decrease in fall frequency. We also found that transfer quality improved as measured by the transfer assessment instrument, and seated postural control improved as well. We used the function independent sitting test, the FIST. But we didn't see any changes in concerns about falling, quality of life, or community participation. And sorry, I just noticed the chat is looking at blood pressure as relates to change in sitting position. We have not done anything related to blood pressure, but certainly something, again, all these multifaceted things that go into it. So certainly a great suggestion. Thank you. All right. So then so that first study was just among individuals living with multiple sclerosis. So then we essentially just repeated the study again among individuals living with spinal cord injury. We did improve the intervention based on the feedback from the participants, and we included additional exercises to focus on upper limb exercises to enhance transfer performance, and we kind of beefed up our discussion on falls with the participants. So we saw pretty similar results, decrease in fall frequency, improvement in seated postural control, and we actually did start to see an improvement in quality of life as well after those 12 weeks. Transfer skills didn't change, but the participants had pretty good transfer skills to start with, so we didn't see any change over the time. But again, we didn't see any changes in concerns about falling or community participation. And those are really, our main goal is to try to enhance those items. So because of this, we decided, and we're gathering more data from those qualitative studies simultaneously. So we said, you know what, we need to revamp this. We really need to be adding more into these intervention studies. So we developed a new program using some of the data from our pilot research, and then the qualitative and quantitative data that we were capturing as well. So we developed a new program called Individualized Reduction of Falls, or IROL. And we have a protocol paper on that if you'd like to check it out. But I'll just describe the intervention. So we expanded the program significantly. And this study was funded by the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. So it is just focused specifically on individuals living with MS. So we moved it from a one-on-one intervention to a group-based intervention. And we expanded from 1 session to 6 sessions, and each session is 2 hours. So we added quite a bit of content to the program. And there's anywhere from 2 to 5 participants in the group, and it's led by a licensed physical or occupational therapist. And we had study locations in Chicago, Atlanta, and Georgia. I'm sorry, in Champaign, Chicago, Atlanta, and Champaign, Illinois. So as far as the foundation for the study, we based it on both the health belief model, and then we also do a lot on self-efficacy and social learning theory. So I'll talk about that more in just a minute. So looking at the study protocol, also pretty expansive study. So the participants first came into the lab, and we did all the baseline testing with them. And then after that, we actually sent them back home, and they prospectively monitored their falls for 13 weeks. We wanted to get a really good baseline idea of how frequently they were falling. Then they engaged in the study intervention, which is that 6-week, 2-hour per week session. And I'll go into a lot more detail about the intervention itself in just a moment. Then they returned right after the intervention, and we repeated the baseline testing. And we had them prospectively monitor their falls again for about 12 more weeks. We did a third study visit, same testing, and then a final 12-week period of fall tracking. And so they were in the study for a long time, about 44 weeks total. So some of the key outcomes that we looked at were just basic fall frequency, how often they were falling. We looked at fear of falling. We did this a couple different ways. We used the spinal cord injury fall concern scale, even though it's among individuals living with multiple sclerosis. We still used this protocol. We're actually trying to validate a bigger study for that, for a more inclusive measure. And then we used a variety of different fall prevention strategy measures, looking at kind of targeting some of the specific things that we were talking about in the intervention, and looking at people's level of confidence in their ability to prevent falls from occurring. And then we did do some functional mobility testing. We looked at participants' transfer quality using the transfer assessment instrument. We looked at wheelchair skills using the wheelchair skills test. And then seated postural control, again, we used the fist. And then we also used a force plate to look at their postural control. And then we looked at quality of life using the World Health Organization quality of life scale, the brief version, and then looking at community participation using the community participation indicators, or the CPI. And then after participants completed the second study visit, right after the intervention, we did qualitative interviews to examine the impact of the program. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into what the intervention was actually all about. So first I'll do an overview and then go into more specifics. So we developed the intervention based on all of this data we've been collecting from the qualitative research that we had done previously, and other literature focused on different risk factors associated with falls. So we really tried to fine tune and target the components of the intervention to be based on what the participants were telling us that falls were occurring. So we did do this in person. This was pre-COVID, and I'll talk about our journey after that. But it was primarily a lecture-based education supported by different videos and photos. We did do quite a few case studies. We had like one case study that kind of went through the entire 6-week program, where we highlighted different positive and negative outcomes of various fall prevention techniques. We did different skills training with the participants, looking at transfers, wheelchair and scooter skills, and then we had a seated exercise program engaged with that. Participants had a video that they could watch, and then the therapist also demonstrated the exercises for them. And then during the intervention, they had some practice time with the therapist where they could get one-on-one feedback on their performance. Each week we had participants do a journal entry to reflect on what they had learned that week, to increase self-awareness, attention to different life situations that increased fall risk. And these were really, we used these to foster discussion during the intervention. We had a lot of self-management embedded into the program. So kind of looking at different tasks. So medical management, I don't like this term, but that's what the literature says. So things like, understanding and maintaining an exercise routine, role management, using different compensatory strategies during valued activities. And then developing self-management skills. So working through problem solving, we used action planning quite a bit, and then self-tailoring their activities. And we integrated several practice opportunities, not just the physical skills. We had participants work through different concepts, and I'll go into those in more detail in just a second, to increase their mastery and increasing their fall self-efficacy, and hopefully decreasing fear of falling as well. And we had a lot of group discussions as well to hopefully pull in that peer modeling and social persuasion. And I have to say, I ran some of these sessions myself, and the group discussions were just the best. It was so great seeing the participants learn from each other, talk to each other about different challenges they were experiencing. And then one thing, I apologize, we also had them work on goal setting quite a bit as well, but I go into that in the next section. Okay, so take a deeper dive into the different content areas. So we did, this is the framework for our program it's called Get Wise. And I'll go through each of these individual sections. And these weren't just like one session was on goal setting. All of these components were integrated throughout the 6-week education program. And actually, real quick, before we get into that, I just wanted to let you know, if you are interested, you can go to our website, and I'll put this in the chat for everybody. So eventually we did move this program online, like everything in life. So if you click on supplemental materials under this PVA section, you can actually download our whole program manual. So you can see the details of each of the 6 sessions that we did. So you're free to use this if you would like to use it in your clinic and so on, go ahead. We just, if you do use it, please just let me know that you're using it. All right, can you guys still all see my screen okay?
Yes, looking good.
Perfect, okay, great. So, okay, so kind of just our overall goal, and something that we have integrated throughout was this idea of kind of falls, like why do we care about falls? So that's something we kept going back throughout the entire session. And we really focused on the idea of community participation. That was our big emphasis with the program. We talked a lot about this idea of multifaceted nature of falls and the influence of falls on community participation, and potential strategies to enhance home and community participation. And early on, we asked people to start thinking about, what's something that you'd like to get back to doing, or maybe that you're fearful of doing because of your falls. And we kept kind of circling back to that throughout the entire 6 sessions. And we also used action planning techniques to help people achieve these different goals. Okay, so looking into, first part of GetWise goals. So each week the participants set weekly goals associated with the educational content. And again, they use action planning. Here's our action planning form that we use to accomplish larger, more complex goals. And every week, then the subsequent week, the participants would discuss their goals, any barriers that they faced achieving these goals, so on and so forth. We also had an exercise program, and I'll just let it play while I'm talking so you can kind of get an idea of it. So it is an exercise program designed to strengthen core and upper extremity musculature. This was really a group-based thing. We would have the participants, so after the program was introduced, each session we would have the participants do an exercise together, and everybody would talk about it. We'd be like, okay, your form looks great, or maybe move your shoulder a little bit more like this. And it was both feedback from the therapist and the participants. And the therapist who was running the program helped to modify the program based on individual needs. And actually, if you look at that website, we have I forget the word we use for a modified program, the standard program, and then an advanced program if people found that program too easy. And you can see we're doing modifications in this video as well. All right, next part is transfers. So again, these were all informed by the literature, our findings, showing these different circumstances associated with falls, and transfers was definitely a big one that came out. So there's group-based skill instruction on transfers. So we started off with very basic transfers and then moved on to more complex ones, things to the car, the toilet, to the bed. And talked a lot about benefits of appropriate skills. We talked a lot about challenges that people were facing. So for example, one participant talked a lot about, she was fine transferring to the toilet at home, but then when she went out, she had trouble in an accessible restroom. So that really limited her from going out. So we tried to problem solve with her through different ways to transfer because she was fearful of falling. So we had video to introduce the transfers, and the participants could watch the videos at home, and then also live instructions and written instructions with the initial education. And then throughout, again, we introduced this early because it's such an important concept. And then throughout the program, we would have opportunities where the therapist could interact one-on-one with the participant to give them individualized feedback. So this is just an example of some of the written transfer education materials. Okay. Next part is on wheelchair and scooter skills. So again, this was group-based skill instruction, and we went from basic, intermediate to more complex skills. We based the content on the wheelchair skills program developed by Dr. Kirby. This is a highly validated program. I don't think I know any programs that are more validated. Tons of literature on the efficacy of the program. And there's a great website with different instructions and videos as well. But something that we did was really talk about the benefits of appropriate skills. We had people consider times when their wheelchair skills were failing them, where there were situations that maybe they wanted to go to, but they were fearful of going to them because they didn't feel like they had adequate skills and they were afraid of falling. So one example, participant really liked the library, but there was a big ramp to go up it, and she was very fearful that she would fall while trying to navigate the ramp. So we worked on that. We worked on the ramp quite a bit with this individual. And again, we had videos and live demonstrations plus written instructions for the initial education. Next up is wheelchair and scooter maintenance. Again, when we looked at the circumstances, wheelchair malfunctions were kind of one of the big ones that led to falls. So we integrated this into the program. So how to properly maintain wheelchairs and scooters. We put a really big emphasis on the need to contact the wheelchair vendor if the person felt uncomfortable at all with doing any of the skills. So if something was wrong and they felt like, oh, this is way over my head, I don't want to do it, making sure that they knew who their vendor was and really emphasizing this need to contact them to get problems fixed, not just letting them go. And we based this off the wheelchair maintenance training program from the University of Pittsburgh. I think if you sorry, I apologize, I don't have the website here, but you can go to the University of Pittsburgh website, and if you type this in, it comes up pretty easily. We also had an in-class activity where we helped the participants set a maintenance schedule, and also, again, made sure we're like, make sure you know that vendor, and we made them, write it down, and so that they had that information with them. Next area is wheelchair and scooter related influence on fall risk. So we talked a lot about the setup of the wheelchair. Some of my early work was on upper extremity preservation, so I couldn't just let that one go. I did talk about shoulder preservation a bit, but most of the emphasis was placed on how the setup of the chair can influence a fall. So maybe like the axle position, the pros and cons of moving it forward. Don't worry, we didn't have them all move it back. We talked about, striking a balance between shoulder preservation and stability, good wheelchair skills, different components of their chair, how that can change your fall risk, the caster size, making sure those wheel locks are actually locking, influence of seat elevators, how that can help with transfer skills. And so we had a group discussion where we had people kind of talk about their current chair, what was good, what was bad, and maybe what they would like to consider when they get their next chair. So they could already get that planning in, so that when they're faced with getting the new chair, they already had some ideas of what they wanted to change. And we also addressed the issue of funding. Seat elevators are not always easy to get funded. So alternative ways that they could try to get funding for those more expensive products that may be a challenge. We also talked quite a bit about symptom management, especially among individuals living with multiple sclerosis. So, we couldn't talk about every symptom, but we did have, we focused on fatigue, spasticity, and muscle weakness, but then we gave participants some additional materials for other symptoms like bowel and bladder dysfunction and so on that can be associated with falls. So we had a lecture and then mostly group discussion, though, to talk about modification of different activities so that they can do these activities when they're feeling their best, maybe when their fatigue is low, spasticity is well managed, feeling their strongest. And again, we talked about individual situations where symptoms came into play and how maybe the person could do it differently in the future so that those symptoms wouldn't have such an influence. The next area was environmental safety. So we had people identify different environmental hazards, talked about different home modifications, and then we talked about funding of fall prevention equipment. So different ways that they could get some of these things to help modify their home. So maybe, we had people think about, the bathroom, maybe they're falling in the shower quite a bit. So maybe a different shower chair, and then how actually could that get funded. We also talked a bit about how to fall safely. We did not have people fall out of their chair intentionally. We had them watch different videos so that they could get some input on how to fall safely. And then that role, sorry for the pun, that went into fall recovery strategies pretty well. So we actually spent quite a bit of time on this in class, helping participants develop a fall management plan. So we had this pretty extensive worksheet that we had people go through different steps. And we started off with a group discussion talking about current fall recovery plans. So what were people doing? Did they have a friend or a care partner on standby? If they fell, what were they going to do? And having people really consider, is this working, or do I need to put some modifications in? And really emphasize the importance of a fall recovery plan. And then we did have some lecture components where we talked about kind of best practices related to a fall recovery plan. We talked about different technology that can help to a person to recover, like lifts or different steps that they can use to get back up, and then when to get medical attention after the fall. And then we kind of kept going back and forth and having people work on their plan, a little bit more education. And then there was an opportunity for the therapist to meet one-on-one with the participant to help them work through their plan. And then, sorry, I just saw a question in the chat. Do you come across situations where MS clients are still in a scooter, but would likely be safer in a group 3 power chair? Yes. So I'm not a huge scooter fan, to be perfectly honest. So we did talk about the different types of devices, and obviously giving people their choice, what they feel most comfortable with, but did talk quite a bit about the advantages of a power chair, and really trying to emphasize the community participation part, how they can do more things in the power chair versus the scooter, trying to provide them with all the education so that they can make the best informed choice. But yeah, I agree, it's definitely a tricky one. And then finish up fall recovery strategies. We had video demonstrations of various fall recovery techniques. And then we had people do a big action planning activity where they kind of finalize this worksheet that they have been working through to develop a check-in system with a care partner or a friend, selection of a different type of communication device, thinking about who's going to assist them when a fall occurs, and having a backup person in case that person's not available, and different practice strategies. I had one participant who ended up buying an Apple Watch and also like a video system for his house, and he's like, this program has cost me so much money, but I think he felt a lot more secure by the end of the program. He was definitely an exception, somebody who had the resources to do those things. All right. So I just wanted to go into some of the results and just check the chat. Yeah, the scooter thing is always such a tricky one for me. All right, so looking at the results, we had 24 participants enrolled. These were all individuals who were full-time wheelchair users living with multiple sclerosis, and they were individuals who could transfer either independently or with moderate assistance. So we did exclude in this version of the study people who needed either max assistance or total assistance to transfer. So we had 24 participants enrolled and 21 completed visit 2, so we included them in the data analysis. And the participants were an average of 58 years old, 76% female. The majority of them were using power chairs. We did have a few scooter users in the group. And these were individuals who are living with MS for a pretty long time, about average of 21 years. And they were definitely full-time wheelchair users, used their mobility device for an average of 65 hours per week. So looking at the results, Regarding fall frequency and fear of falling, we did not see any significant differences in this outcome, but we did see a 13% reduction in fall frequency between visit 1 and visit 3. And reports of activity curtailment due to fear of falling. So that question, did you stop doing activity because of your fear? Reduced from 83% of the participants saying yes at visit 1 to only 53% saying yes at visit 2. So I think some of the qualitative results are very meaningful though. So even though it wasn't statistically significant reduction, people did feel like they were falling less frequently. And they did also report being less afraid because they know how to better maneuver myself. So. We did see significant improvements in these fall prevention strategy metrics. And kind of the qualitative response was, this program helped me to focus more, think more about my different components and so on. We got that response quite a bit. The program just helped them think. These weren't major changes. These were people who were already transferring, doing wheelchair skills. But we got this a lot of, it helped me think about it, maybe in a different way or more about it. Regarding functional mobility, we did see a significant improvement in transfer skills. So first quote is about transfers and a person talking about being more cautious with their surroundings, making sure they're stable. Kind of, again, it's not a huge change that they made, but kind of just taking that moment, stopping, thinking, making sure that things were set up correctly. The next quote is regarding wheelchair skills, which we didn't see a significant change in, but people talking about being more conscientious about what they're doing instead of kind of just like, okay, let's see what happens, really focusing down on it. And then I really like this quote regarding the exercises. I've learned better ways to keep my balance. And this was something that we targeted in the exercise program. It was to help strengthen, but also for people to understand their functional boundaries. So we did a lot of reaching activities. So helping the people understand, okay, exactly how far can I reach? And I'm also strengthening when I'm reaching. So I was glad to see that came out in the qualitative responses as well. So regarding quality of life and community participation, remember this was our big one that we were trying to focus on. We didn't see any statistically significant differences there, but I actually really love this first quote that we got from a participant about this topic, talking about his daughter who swims. And before I'd be too nervous to go to any of her meets that were further distance than what he usually takes her to, but now I'm not worried. And so he went on to say, like, he goes to these meets now, and he loves that he can watch her swim. So that, you know, that was really meaningful to me. I was so glad that this participant was again engaging in these activities that were really meaningful for them. And then this other quote about participation and so on, it really helped me think about how to do things better and differently. So again, not major changes that we're making, but having people just kind of consider this idea further. So this study went, we were going strong in 2020 and then got shut down because of COVID. And so we very quickly moved to an online platform. And I actually, you know, I have to say, I think it was a wonderful move. And we actually were planning to do that. And eventually we did get some additional funding from the PVA to actually move appropriately. But one of the biggest barriers that our participants reported about the study was just engaging, because it is a lot of content. It's a lot of time, especially in Champaign. We have, you know, it's a fairly rural area. So people were coming long distances, and especially individuals living with MS, a lot of them talked about like, oh, I'm so tired. Like, you know, just getting there is hard. And then, you know, doing the activities, I'm so exhausted when I'm getting home. So this really helped us to be able to expand our access. We were able to recruit participants from across the United States. And our results were fairly similar. We did one study that we kind of just did very quickly quickly, when COVID shut us down, we quickly moved to an online platform, but we did test 20 participants, and the results were fairly similar. We didn't see as big of an impact on transfer skills, but this was also, challenging times. So we did another study that was funded through the PBA. We took a lot more time with our process of the translation, and we just did a small feasibility study, but the results of that have also been positive. So we are actually planning to move this to a mobile platform, so that one of the complaints for the online version of the program was that participants were not feeling like they had this level of connection with both the therapist who was implementing the program and then their fellow participants. So we're trying to find more ways to be more interactive. We did do the sessions on Zoom, so the participants were able to talk and so on. But I mean, I think we all feel this way on Zoom, like there is just kind of this disconnect. So that is probably our major push for the mobile platform. We're looking at different ways that people can be more interactive together. And we're also looking at different ways to really facilitate more of an individualized program. So people being able to set different reminders for themselves, and then also get reminders to do some of these action planning activities. It just hopes to make it more of an interactive environment. We are considering a hybrid approach as well. So perhaps having the participants view the materials asynchronously, and then I don't think every week, but maybe having one or two sessions where the person could actually come into the clinic and be able to work with a therapist. Alternatively, perhaps it's something that they could work on with their own therapist. And this is something that we encourage throughout the program, that if a person is interested in learning maybe a more complex transfer skill that we just don't have the ability to teach, even in person, we didn't have time to teach really complex skills. So we encourage them to work with their own therapist to get additional training. And we certainly emphasize that quite a bit when we were online. So maybe either the person can come in for a group session, or maybe we have instructions and so on that could be provided to their own therapist so that they can continue to work on these skills in person. So definitely more to come, and hopefully we can kind of strike a good balance between the benefits of having the in-person intervention, but avoiding making the participants travel long distances, kind of sit for a while to engage in the intervention. All right, so that is all I have. If you are interested, you can visit our website, but if you'd like more information about the education intervention, check out the website that I put in the chat. So I think we have some time for questions. Or we can just all go home early and relax. I know we all need it after this long day.
I was going to say, thank you so much, Laura. It was a great presentation. I was going to say you were answering questions throughout, so we'll wait a couple seconds and see if anyone else throws anything up there. But in the meantime, I can also give the CEU code, and then anyone who wants to kind of jump in with a question can do so. So here, let me get that pulled up and I will do that. All right. So the CEU code for this session is GCS98P. And that's GCS98P. And I will put that in the chat. There's a couple of questions I think that are coming through here now.
Sure, I'll put the website here. So as far as payment, We are hoping potentially to do this in a similar model. So the National Multiple Sclerosis Society does have a program for ambulatory individuals, and they host it on their website. They do ask for a modest fee to support the program and so on. Eventually, I would hope if we could get some ongoing funding so that we could make this freely available. We've talked quite a bit, and I think we always will need a therapist involved to, foster these discussions and so on. So there will be some costs associated with that, but I am hoping that we could partner with an organization so that we could make it available at like a pretty modest cost to the participants. So as far as the timing, so it has helped when we went to the online version, we split the program so that we have asynchronous materials, and then the synchronous part is a shorter period of time now, mostly focused on group discussion. So I have talked to some colleagues too about doing this in maybe inpatient rehab or like a day program where the participants on their own time can watch the asynchronous materials and then come in, and then as part of their therapy session, they can talk about this. I see this probably more though as maybe like a separate group program, not integrated into physical therapy itself, especially in inpatient rehab, but maybe kind of as a separate program. And again, hopefully partnering with an organization so that we can make it available to people in a cost-effective manner. Yep, I hope probably my biggest goal in life is to get people out of scooters. So if we can accomplish that, I'd be very happy. They certainly have their place, and I've just seen a lot of accidents and so on. But I certainly understand, they're much easier to transport and so on. But yeah, my own personal preferences is for power chairs. So as far as falls at baseline, so one of the reasons I think we didn't see as much of a change is we did have this prospective monitoring period. So possibly people during those pilot studies maybe were overestimating their falls. We did have a small group of participants though, so I think that's part of the reason why we didn't see significant changes occurring. Also, kind of looking at the timeframes, like often these falls are kind of over 6 months or a year. So I think going longer term out would also be helpful for us to maybe see a bigger difference related to the program. And that's something we hope to do in the future as well. Monitor the participants for a longer period of time, hopefully through a mobile app so it's easier for them to do. For people in wheelchair clinics and discuss features that would help. Yeah, so we're always referring people out. So we were kind of the basis of this was to hope to give people this foundational education. And then throughout the whole program, we had different resources, like where can you learn more? What can you do? Actually, one thing we did was have them look for ATPs in their area so that they could have, a high quality fitting and seating experience. So yeah, we're definitely always referring out to the professionals. Anything else I can answer? All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time this afternoon. Have a great evening.